Hello, comrades. This is Online Communist Forum, Israel's general strike, what it is and what isn't. Political report from CPGB's Provisional Central Committee, followed by discussion and debate, and on to Jack Conrad.
Okay, thanks, Burke. Well, I'm going to begin, as it says on the tin, with Israel's, was it a general strike? Was it an aborted general strike? Anyway, the called general strike. And of course, this occurred after the death of 6 Israeli captives. Exactly how they died, I think, remains a matter of dispute. I think in war, one should be very cautious about any news. So the Israeli authorities say that they were shot. That could be true. They were shot because Israel had sent some Shin Bet army team to get them out. On the other hand, we have the Hamas story about them, or at least some of them, I don't know the details, being either shot by Israel or died in bombing. I just don't know until we have the autopsy. I'm not going to comment on that. Of course, we had the call for a general strike. This was adding to the protests called by relatives of the captives. And of course, we had the courts in Israel then banning the general strike. Has to be said, at least in terms of the reports that I've read, it still went ahead, but was called short. But it went ahead, first of all, in municipalities where the opposition is either in control or strong. So, for example, Tel Aviv. On the other hand, certainly when it came to government employees and the general observance of this general strike, support for it was much less in Jerusalem. And obviously in East Jerusalem, this would be a settler politics. So not surprisingly, if anyone who knows, Israeli politics, that's where the supporters of the right wing of the existing government and its various components would be concentrated. Either way, on the Sunday before the general strike, we had reports of 500,000 Israelis taking to the streets in Tel Aviv. Reports are of 200,000. That's an awful lot of people, given the actual size of the Israeli population. And also, we should add the size of the Hebrew, the Jewish Israeli population. But we should also put into this formula that it wasn't just Hurricane, the General Workers Union, that called a general strike. But we also had corporations. I don't know about ordering, but about encouraging their workers to take the Monday off to actually join the protest. So this wasn't what you would call an ordinary general strike. Clearly, as the court said, this was a political strike, and this was a political strike designed to pressurize the Netanyahu government to shift its position when it came to negotiations with Hamas. I mean, that's the long and the short of it. I suppose that it isn't surprising that some elements of the left, most of the left, I think, get it basically right. But it shouldn't really surprise us that there are some elements of the left that look at this general strike as some sort of harbinger of better times, harbinger of Arab Jewish unity. Personally, I think that's profoundly mistaken. So, for example, I was reading in The Socialist, the paper of the Socialist Party in England and Wales, that, for a brief few hours, this is a quote, this general strike exposed where real power lay. I think that's mistaken. You could say that real power is closing things down, but when it's done in cooperation with your bosses, I don't think that shows anything of the sort. Indeed, what I would say is what it's an illustration of is the lack of political independence of the working class. When it acts as a tail of Peace Party, call it maybe the sort of center in Israeli politics. I sort of loathe to use the word the left of Israeli politics in this particular context. But anyway, when it's in the context of a struggle within Zionism, I think that the word left is misapplied. Nevertheless, what we were told in the Socialist, which apparently is meant to give us hope, is not only was there this brief general strike, but lo and behold, it's not only the Arab Israelis that suffer poverty. So according to the figures, 39% of them officially live in poverty. So do ultra Orthodox Jews. That's their description, by the way, not mine. I personally would have thought that rather than use the word ultra Orthodox, I would actually just prefer the word Orthodox Jews. Either way, we're told that 35% of them live in poverty. And this is meant to give us hope. So we're meant to sort of conjure up a picture of ultra-Orthodox Jews, Socialist Party's description, marching shoulder to shoulder with the Arab 20% of Israel's population. I don't think that works. The fact of the matter is that if we look at the ultra-Orthodox, again, their words, not mine, what you tend to get is when they come into politics, well, isn't it a surprise? They tend to support the parties, the politics of the right, as opposed to the politics of the left. In other words, some sort of a crude economistic approach to this question is misleading. And it sort of says that if you're in poverty, somehow that's a driver to the left. Well, no, it can actually be a driver to the right, because what this 35% in poverty will be saying is we don't want to be like those Arabs. We want our national privileges. That's the tendency in such circumstances, i.e. under circumstances of what is called an exclusion colony as opposed to an exploitation colony. Okay, we should also add that Herostraat, as I say, the General Workers' Union, it's very hard simply to call it a union. Again, in some sections of the left, we get a description of it being Israel's version of the TUC. What we need to understand is that this union was responsible basically for giving birth to the Labour Party in Israel, and certainly ensuring that it formed basically the core of the government in Israel from 48, I don't know till when, till about 1970. In other words, what we have here is a union, and actually is at the forefront of the Zionist settler project, and indeed what characterized it, not only in its early years, but right on into the situation where Israel declared independence was campaigns to actually bar capitalists from employing Arab labor. So they would picket employers and demand 100% Jewish employment as opposed to employing cheaper Arab labor. They also distinguished themselves from attacking Arab market stalls, Arab shops, on the basis that stalls, shops should be exclusively Jewish. Well, you can say that the TUC has got its faults, but I don't think we can actually therefore equate even our TUC with its pretty mixed and sometimes horrible record with what we actually have in Israel. I think it's therefore important to stress the point that it's very unlikely that there will be any progressive solution within Israel itself, because what we have in Israel is something like an 80% Jewish majority, a 20% Arab minority. And what we have is a dynamic to the right, a dynamic that doesn't produce working class unity, but actually reinforces the division in the working class. And certainly that's why we in the CPGB basically look to a regional solution to this question. And the solution is the working class in this region taking the lead. I would still say that it's got traction in the demand for Arab unification. This was something that was extraordinarily potent in the 1950s into the 1960s. And certainly with that, you have to talk about working class leadership. We're not talking about a rerun of Nasser or a rerun of, Baathism. So we're talking about Arab unity led by the working class that puts the working class in power. Fundamentally no different in that sense to the sort of perspective that Marx and Engels had when it came to German unification in the 19th century. So instead of a Bismarck, what they envisaged, what they fought for, was the working class taking the lead on this question. And in the process, of course, you overthrow the Ba'athist dictatorship in Syria, the monarchies in Saudi Arabia and Jordan and elsewhere, the military regime in Egypt. And on that basis, then you've got something to offer this 80% majority in Israel. Hey, how about joining the ruling class? Hey, how about actually breaking with these corporations that actually exploit you? How about joining in with comrades in Europe, comrades in other parts of the world that are fighting for socialism and maybe have actually achieved, the rule of the working class? That, so at least as far as I can see, although it seems the most distant perspective, is actually the most realistic perspective that we actually have available to us today. Everything else, I think, in terms of various one-state solutions, various two-state solutions, falls at the first hurdle. Okay, I thought I'd then turn to a related story. I was reading this in the online journal Democracy Now, and this was an interview with Gershon Baskin. I don't know if anyone recalls him or have heard him speak on the media before, but he is the guy that took the lead in negotiating the freeing of Gilad Shalit. I don't know if you remember him. The Hamas, I think, exchanged him. He was an Israeli soldier that they'd captured I think they exchanged him for something like 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. But it's this guy, Gershon, that was primarily responsible for negotiating the deal. Well, apparently, he's kept his back channels open to Hamas and has been talking to Hamas over, the recent period. He actually broke his contacts with Hamas because of October the 7th, but given, the captives, the understandable human desire of their relatives and friends to get them back, he actually put himself forward to reopen his contacts with people in the Hamas leadership that he knows from previous experience. Either way, he said that about 2 weeks ago, so this would be about 1 week ago, so about 3 weeks ago, from our point of view, I obtained an agreement. And this was going to be a 3-week deal. So in other words, it's going to take 3 weeks to complete, for the release of 107 hostages. I think that's the remaining ones. Certainly it's the ones that Hamas can bargain with. That's my understanding. But anyway, 107 hostages. Remember, this is his words, not mine. For an end of the war, which means Israel withdrawing completely from Gaza and a Palestinian prisoner release. Now, he says that he got an agreement in principle that the entire Hamas leadership agrees with that outline. So the details can be negotiated, but Hamas operates on the basis of not one person say so, but some sort of collective agreement between its, I think they call it the Polit Bureau, so the political bureau of Hamas. So they'd agreed to it. But again, these are his words, but Netanyahu does not want an end to the war. And what Netanyahu was doing is insisting on this, what do they call it? The Philadelphia corridor between Gaza and Egypt. And I'm sure you've heard various Israeli spokespersons saying that if they don't secure this corridor, then the tunnels will be reopened and the arms will flow and Hamas will launch another October the 7th. Well, my understanding is, again from the same source, actually the tunnels ain't operating. They've been sealed. Egypt doesn't want the tunnels operating, and therefore this is a, how should you put it, an excuse to precisely stop a deal being done. You can get commentary which misses the point really, that if Israel merely manned this little strip of territory, its troops would be a sitting target. Maybe not for Hamas, but for anyone else who fancies having a go, and they would have a go. The idea that you just leave Israeli troops along this long, thin piece of land and you don't lob rockets, you don't lob shells at them. So militarily, this has been described as setting up the IDF, as ducks to be bang, 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 shot down. But of course, that isn't what it's about. This isn't a serious military proposal. This is merely Netanyahu insisting on something that's a credible story for the naive, that can be brought by sufficient numbers of the Israeli population, that excuses not doing a deal that actually gets back these war captives, that excuses not doing a deal with Hamas. And indeed, what we have with Netanyahu saying that he's going to get the Hamas leader in Gaza, we're going to search Sinwar out and we're going to kill you. That is his declaration in terms of peace negotiations. He does not want peace negotiations. He wants the war to continue. And I think that Moshe Machover argues in the current edition of the Weekly Worker, partially, of course, we all know that this is for personal reasons. He wants to keep out of the courts. He wants to keep out of prison. He wants to stay as prime minister. But we also need to add that Zionism has got an aim of a greater Israel, to use the phrase, from the river to the sea. That's the aim. And of course, to establish that and to ensure that that continues to function, it has to be not only an ethnocracy, the rule of one ethnic group, but given the rough balance between the Israeli Jewish population, the Hebrew population, and the Palestinian population in a greater Israel, well, that doesn't work. So therefore, Israel as a political economy is therefore driven to ethnic cleansing. We've seen that in 48. And Netanyahu and his fellow cabinet members, often they're completely explicit about the necessity of a second Nakba, a second round of ethnic cleansing, either of the West Bank, either of Gaza, either of what we now call Israel proper, or all of them. So that really is what this war is about. It really isn't about getting the war captives back. That's a cover. That's obvious. That was obvious from the beginning. And neither is it about defeating Hamas. As long as there's Palestinians, under present circumstances, there will be a Hamas. It's a political movement, and you can kill individual fighters, but you're not going to kill the idea. For every individual leader you kill, 100 will come forward to replace them. Okay, just a quick comment on the Labour government, Lamy cancelling 30 export licenses out of 350, which leaves 320 left. I think we should say that we ought to say that this is down to the pro-Palestinian movement. I don't think that this is the Labour government simply taking advice from lawyers. I think there's also the court of public opinion in this context as well. I don't know what the 30 cover, but again, from a quick read, they don't seem to cover F-35s and F-16s. These are Israel's sort of mainstay fighter bomber aircraft. Either way, it militarily, it's an irrelevance, but politically, I do think it has significance. And clearly, what we're demanding on our side of the barricade is all the rest, all 320 export licenses, all of them ought to be cancelled. Again, not because it will make any decisive difference on the battlefield, it won't, but because of politics. If you want a decisive difference, of course, it's the United States. That is the real supplier. And Britain is just a minor, link in the chain when it comes to US arms and US arms exports. Just to add on, as a sort of caveat to that, the arrest of various Palestine Action militants. Sarah Wilkinson comes to mind, but so does Richard Barnard, the joint founder of Palestine Action. And my understanding is that he's also being charged with terrorism offences. And from what I can gather, basically that's praising a banned organisation. Now, exactly what praising is, I don't know, but that's against the law at the present time. And I'm not going to praise Hamas or Hezbollah, merely to note, as the BBC does every time they mention these words, that this is a prescribed organisation in Britain and many other countries. Well, from my angle, although I don't support it, I consider it quite legitimate for people to say that they want to see the victory of Hamas or the victory of Hezbollah against the Israeli army. Now, is that saying something that's illegal? I don't know. And we should add to that, of course, because this is now under the watch of Yvette Cooper, the further arrests of activists in Just Stop Oil. So this is Labour oppression, basically carrying on from Tory oppression. One would have thought that, again, something that we should be demanding is the repeal of this anti-terror legislation, because it's clearly curbing freedom of speech, legitimate freedom of speech. Just a quick comment on yesterday's demonstration. This was the 17th national demonstration in London. The organisers say 125,000. I got no way of, I went to the front of the demonstration. I waited to the end, but I certainly wasn't trying to tot up how many people were there. There were a lot of people, but nothing like the, 800, 900,000 people. That was the peak demonstration. And I can certainly remember not waiting for the end of it, because I was going to wait for the end of it, but it took so damn long and I was so damn tired. I have to confess that I went home. But apparently there were 8 arrests, which is a tiny number given the size of the demonstration. And again, my understanding is that amongst them, and I don't know whether it's the majority, were counter-protesters. Now, as I said, I covered the whole demonstration. I didn't see the counter-protesters this time. Apparently they were gathered in Kensington High Street. But anyway, I have to say I missed them. The police were thoroughly uncooperative. The police were thoroughly disruptive. In the run-up to the demonstration, they arbitrarily announced that instead of the demonstration beginning at 1, rally at 12, begin at 1, the demonstration would begin at 2:30. That makes a huge difference if you're coming a long way to London. And at the end, what they did is, having agreed 1 o'clock, then they imposed a 1:30 beginning time. And again, I can testify to it, that what they did as the demonstration marched up, into Kensington, the police were constantly stopping it and delaying it for 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Their original excuse was, and I haven't followed this up, that there was some other event happening. I don't know what it was. Either way, I certainly witnessed the fury of the chief steward on the day with the police liaison officers. You promised, you pledged that you'd keep to these times, and they also imposed a 5 o'clock end in terms of when the demonstration had to finish, had to disperse. So the police, I think, acted deliberately to put people off coming, and deliberately delayed the march and deliberately slowed the march down throughout the course of the procession. Just to add, there are two more Palestine demonstrations coming up in the near future. The first is at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool, September the 21st, and that begins at somewhere around Lime Street, the main station in Liverpool. And then the next London demonstration is Saturday, October the 12th. Now, again, with all these demonstrations, there's an awful lot of negotiations between the various organizations who are organizing these demonstrations and the police. And therefore, we never have where the thing is going to be from. All I would say is there's a pretty standard practice of rally at 12, officially begin at 1. Sometimes they do begin at 1, you know, literally on the dot, bang, we're off. But the police clearly have instructions to be uncooperative and to delay and delay, to disrupt publicity and all the rest of it. Okay, moving on. I was just struck by figures produced by the Copernicus group of scientists in terms of climate expectations, because the expectation is for this year, 2024, we look like we're heading for the hottest year since 2023, which was the hottest since, etc., etc., etc. So we're hitting one record after the other. The line of increase continues. So although in Britain it's been a pretty miserable summer, not much sun, quite a lot of rain, quite a lot of cloud, nonetheless, globally things are 0.03 degrees hotter than last year. And I thought I would just, in response to our friend Dave Douglas, who wants to churn out coal and who cares, will adapt sort of type idea, I just thought I'd look up, partially out of fun, you know, sort of, how should I put it, gallows humor, perhaps. But I just thought I'd look up, you know, Google, what if all the ice melted? So, you know, the Arctic ice sheet and the Antarctic ice sheet, what happens then? Now, it has to be stressed that there's no immediate prospect of that happening at all. You know, ice melts slowly, and big ice melts very slowly. So we are talking about, you know, Greenland. We are, you know, in other words, on land. We are talking about the continent of Antarctica. And apparently, if we look at, you know, any conceivable scenario, we're talking about thousands of years. So we're not talking about tomorrow, the year after, or for that matter, the next decade or the next decade. Nonetheless, the point would be applied in reverse, and that is if we actually stopped letting out so much CO2 now, and we went over to net zero, so we have, you know, trees absorbing carbon as well as us breathing out CO2 and all the rest of it, and it balanced out now through some sort of magic, it still is the situation that these ice sheets will continue to melt, because what we're dealing with is energy built into the system that simply cannot be turned around. So you're dealing, you know, to use a metaphor, you're dealing with something equivalent to an oil tanker. You can't simply turn it on a sixpence. It takes a long time. And so we would expect, we know that temperatures will increase whatever. And we also know that the melt will continue as well. Either way, if we arrive at a situation where all melts, then we have a situation of where 40% of the existing population of the world will be displaced. That includes entire countries, such as Bangladesh. Anyone who knows Bangladesh knows it's sort of on a river. It's very low lying, but also countries like Denmark disappear. If you look at a map, the US west coast, big chunks of it go, including the whole of Florida. Now, as I say, this isn't an immediate prospect. Nonetheless, it's that sort of disruption that we're talking about. And of course, what we're dealing with isn't simply, oh, it's a little bit hotter today. You close the blinds, you put on, the air conditioning or whatever. We're talking about the disruption of the entire climate system. So there's still talk, in terms of, it looks like the jet stream, for example, is slowing down. It looks like what is called the Gulf Stream that keeps Britain, for example, with our lovely mild climate. It looks like that is weakening. And you can get dramatic shifts that mean that, something like the US wheat belt gets wiped out and turned into a desert. That isn't something I think that we should take lightly. It isn't something we should wish upon our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. We should actually make sure that we're good, to use a phrase, I think from Engels, that we're good custodians of the planet. We are not trashers. We are not irresponsible. And indeed, we need to recognize that human beings have only been on this planet, at least as Homo sapiens, for what, 200,000 years, 250,000 years. And if we look at our, greater species, it's quite conceivable that, the conditions that allow us to continue get so disrupted that we actually have a species extinction of us, not merely the other animals and plants. And just on that particular subject, just thought it was worthwhile quoting a new book out by someone called M.V. Rana. He's written a book called The Folly of Atomic Power in the Age of Climate Change. And he basically echoes the sort of arguments I've been putting forward in the Weekly Worker. Look, this nuclear power stuff, it takes too long to build these nuclear plants. They're too dangerous. And crucially asks the question, which I think you have to ask, is given how long they take to get up, given how expensive the electricity is of these things, why the hell do governments push forward with this technology? And his answer is exactly the same as mine. It's called the nuclear weapons industry. That's actually what governments are interested in, not in an immediate way, but in terms of having that possibility. So, for example, when I heard the Shah of Iran was wanting nuclear power stations, this must have been in the 70s. I had to say, what does he want nuclear power stations for? Look at the oil, look at the gas in Iran. No, what he wants is the capability of building nuclear weapons. So we should be very careful not falling for the propaganda of the nuclear industry or its useful idiots. And I include people in the so-called ecology movement who've fallen for this line as well. Very quick comment on Ukraine. There's been some talk, in various circles in NATO, foreign ministry level and all the rest of it. Not proposals yet, but talk of NATO troops or NATO missiles being involved in the defense of Ukrainian nuclear power stations. So because they're so damn dangerous, we've had attacks on nuclear power stations, and everyone turns around and says this is grossly irresponsible. The fact that these have been attacks on Russian-held Ukrainian nuclear facilities, how on earth you can blame the Russians in this particular case stretches my credulity, I have to say. To me, it's clear it has to be the Ukrainians. In the same way, Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2 being blown up, this wasn't Putin. It's just absurd. Anyway, we should also add to the Ukraine story reports, I think quite credible, some CNN, US station, about plummeting morale amongst frontline soldiers in the Ukrainian army. Not surprising, after 2 years or so of war and lack of rotation. Grim stuff. I should add, and I haven't heard any reports of it, but of course, as well as the active fronts in the east and the new front in the Kursk Oblast, most of the fronts are quiet. And that will certainly be the case over autumn, and most of them, I think, will be quiet over winter. Ideal conditions for troops that are pissed off, who don't like this war, to fraternize, to come to, don't shoot us, we won't shoot you, agreements, which clearly have the potential to develop into something more and more dangerous as far as the generals on either side are concerned. Thought it was worthwhile further comments on the prison crisis in Britain. We all know the figures. Is it about 1,000 prison cells that are vacant at the moment? With police cells being used, with trials being delayed, with talk of transferring prisoners from British prisons to Estonia. What's that mean in terms of visits? So it's an appalling situation. We've also had the recent BBC report from Pentonville, basically saying it's a shithole, and it's chaos. And that doesn't surprise anybody, surely. But yeah, a very useful report. Again, I think it is worth saying that when you look at most prisoners have got problems in terms of drug addiction, in terms of literacy. An awful lot of them can't read or write properly. An awful lot of them come from very damaged backgrounds, and putting them in prison really should be the last thing that you would do. And so we get reports again coming out of this BBC Pentonville documentary in terms of the violence, both directed prisoner upon prisoner, but also prisoner upon wardens, and wardens on prisoners. But we should also add to that drugs. Not surprisingly, if you're locked up 23 hours a day, what do you do to stop yourself going crazy? Turn to drugs. And often it's a situation, if people haven't got a drug problem when they go into prison, it's very frequent that they come out with a drugs problem. How do drugs get in? There's all sorts of ingenious methods I've been told about, not least at visiting time. But also we should add to that the role of, what's it called? G4S now, it used to be called Group 4. But yeah, the role of underpaid prison wardens actually coming in, not only with drugs, but phones. And, you bring in, a parcel of drugs, and they would top up their wages by several thousand pounds. So prison, to use the words of Michael Howard, or to turn around the words of Michael Howard, he's the former Home Secretary, Tory Home Secretary, former Tory leader, famously at the Tory party conference, said prison works. And I think looking at the state of Britain's prisons at the present time, and the reoffending rate and the damage it does to families and individuals and to society at large, you have to say that prison does not work. And I just thought it was useful as an exercise to look at the situation in Norway. Okay, a smaller country, a richer country than Britain. But I thought it was very instructive. I looked up Norway, and apparently they have no life sentences. So courts cannot impose a life sentence. In other words, if you're in prison, you've got hope. You've got hope that you'll be released. If you behave well, you'll be let out early. But also what they have is a situation of where being incarcerated is punishment enough. So they don't, for example, as they now do in Britain, it's a recent innovation, relatively speaking anyway, deprive prisoners of the vote. I think that came in because Bobby Sands, the H Block hunger striker, actually won his election. From my memory, 81, I could be wrong, a long time ago. And that was an outrage, of course, as far as the Tory government was concerned. But yeah, if we look at Norway, no life sentences, they have the vote, they have family visits, and we're not talking about an hour, we're talking about weekends, we're talking about privacy, we're talking about kids, we're talking about men and women, we're talking about double beds. This privilege has to be earned, apparently, but nonetheless, it's there. We also have a situation in Norway, apparently, of where 50%, and we're talking about, grade A prisoners, so that, apparently the most dangerous prison, half the prison officers are female. We also have a great emphasis on training them. In Britain, prison officers get 12 weeks training. In Norway, they get between 2 and 3 years training. And that includes language and law. So, for example, prison officers in Norway have to learn English because a lot of their prisoners are foreigners, are not English people necessarily, but English as the global language. They have to learn English, they have to learn some law. That's the emphasis, not riots, not pepper sprays, not truncheons. So what are the results? Apparently in Norway, 63 out of 100,000 of their population is in prison. In Britain, it's 150. It's the highest in Europe. Should also look in that context at our draft program. And the reason I quote Norway is it's because it's amongst the best. And I'm not saying that's the best you can achieve under capitalism, but if you can achieve a Norwegian situation under capitalism, we can achieve more in terms of when the working class is influential under capitalism and is getting ready to lead the way out of capitalism. And just to finally say, in that context, of course, no surprise, the reoffending rate in Norway is massively less. I think I've got the statistics here. I have. In Britain, it's a 50% reoffending rate within 1 year. So you let prisoners out, 50% of them will be back in prison after a year. In Norway, it's 20% back after 2 years, 25% back after 5. I think those statistics do tell a tale. Just to add a final comment on that, that in the early years of the Soviet Union, they actually abolished prison as a means of punishment and saw it only as a means of rehabilitation. And I think that should be our approach. Our approach should be about, dealing with damaged people, not punishing damaged people. Okay, moving on, and this is the last item in the political report. We came across, we read the SWP's membership bulletin. This is, from the headquarters coming out once a week to the comrades, telling them that, the demonstration is happening in London around Palestine. There's a demonstration up in Glasgow. This is what's happening at the TUC, etc., etc., etc. This is how many socialist workers go out and recruit, get some Jews off people. That sort of, oh, here's the meetings you ought to be having this week. Here are the titles. It's that sort of type bulletin. So mostly it's pretty boring. But we've just come across one, party notes that announces the replacement of Charlie Kimber as editor of Socialist Worker, and perhaps, well, not perhaps, but definitely more significantly, the replacement and resignation from the SWP Central Committee of Amy Leather. At the present time, well, until the present time, she was joint national secretary, and effectively, after the Delta affair, what was that, 2013, 2014, I'm not quite sure, but around about then, we've talked about her being the effective leader of the SWP in terms of being in charge of the organization. I mean, in the most important, thinker in the SWP is clearly Alex Kalinikos, but Amy, she's the equivalent, and I'm not saying this in a horrible way, but the equivalent under Lenin of Joseph Stalin. She's the general secretary, if you get the point. Anyway, she has not only been replaced, she's resigned as being a member of the Central Committee. And, again, I'm not quite sure, because they don't give you reasons. They simply say, well, thank you, Amy, for being, such a wonderful Central Committee member. But you have to start, in these circumstances, you have to sort of think, don't you? And given actually that it was Amy Leather and Charlie Kimber that were most closely associated with the previous Joseph Stalin of the SWP, Martin Smith, Comrade Delta, who of course had to stand down from the SWP and disappeared from the SWP under, well, in disgrace, wasn't it, because of rape charges. I don't know whether they were false or whatever, we don't know. Either way, of course, that was after having been exonerated by a discipline committee of the SWP, disciplined by mates, but also supported at SWP conferences. This is in the midst of a split. And what we had is Martin's supporters, led by, apparently, Charlie Kimber and Amy Leather, clapping and stamping their feet in solidarity with Martin Smith. And there's another one that ought to be mentioned in this context, and that is Paul Blackledge. He was a member of the editorial board of International Socialism, contributed, quite competent articles for that journal. And I can't remember the date. I should have looked it up. But he was charged in an anonymous blog of some sort with sexual harassment. And what did the SWP do? They dumped him straight away, clearly in reaction to the drubbing and the disgrace of having defended and stood by Martin Smith for so long. They simply dumped him. But the problem for the SWP is that Paul went to court. He took, I don't know how you do it, but he did. He took his anonymous attackers to court, and it was in front of Mr. Justice Sani, who found him innocent and who, how should I put it, when it came to legal expenses, said that the accuser must pay. Now, who the damned accuser was, I still don't know. Does anybody? I don't know. The accuser would, but they kept anonymous. They did not appear in court. Either way, Paul Blackledge's barrister was Eunice Bakash, former, I think, Unison militant. I think he was sacked. I'm not quite sure of his history. Either way, he trained up, showing, he's quite a talented lad, trained up to become a barrister. And because he knew Paul Blackledge, defended him and basically did his, legal services, from my understanding, would be for free. So he's found innocent, and the SWP suspended Yanis and the Newcastle branch of the SWP for standing in solidarity with him. And of course, what they've been demanding is the resignation of one Charlie Kimber and another Amy Leather. Now, I don't know whether any of that adds up to the story, but I just think that these are important elements that look like, at least, a credible version of events. We don't know. I have to say that yesterday on the demonstration, I did approach one or two SWPers and said, Mr. Innocent, what's happened to Amy then? And the first comrade I asked turned around, young, naive, and she said, Amy? Amy who? And I said, your national secretary. Said, I don't know. And then the full-timer came over and I said, what's happened to Amy? I've heard, that she's resigned from the Central Committee. And I don't think she was acting, but she didn't know anything about it. Now, maybe that says something about the SWP's internal bulletin, that only people like us sad folks like us, read it. I don't know, but I would have thought myself, and I didn't detect any, ham acting, but I would have thought myself that the SWP would be awash with rumor, because we don't have any explanation. Do we deserve an explanation? I think we do, not least because the SWP mysteriously, for all of us, issued earlier this year, this strange statement about the Martin Smith case. This is, remember, 10 years ago. They suddenly issued it. So they seem to be under pressure externally when it comes to such questions. So again, I don't know what's going on. If anyone does know what's going on, please enlighten me. I don't think this is a matter of scandal, by the way. I'm not out to blacken anyone's name, but I am out saying that these things should best dealt with openly. If you've got rid of Charlie Kimber, if you've got rid of Amy Leather because of this scandal, we should know. The SWP membership should know. The rest of the movement should know. We want to know what's going on in the SWP. Is this a prelude for a split? I doubt it. But then I didn't think that the Martin Smith episode was a prelude for a split. And indeed, it wasn't it. So like 3 splits later, there you are. That's it. Thank you, Burke. I'll finish there.
Yep. I think Tina was the first to raise her hand, so
Yeah.
Tina.
Yep, I'm just switching everything on. Hold